When he said forever, I believed him. I really did. I was sitting by the small kitchen window that morning, the light still soft, touching the curtains like it didn't want to wake them. He was holding my hand, tracing small circles on my fingers like he always did when he was trying to reassure me. And when he said those words, I'll always be here, no matter what happens, something in me relaxed. Back then, I thought love was something you could trust. Something solid. Something that wouldn't break, especially when you needed it most. But I was wrong. We had been married for 17 years. Not perfect years, but good ones, the kind that felt quiet, ordinary, and safe. We weren't rich. We didn't travel the world. But we had each other, and we built our life brick by brick, day by day. I used to wake up before him, make his tea just the way he liked, strong, no sugar, a little milk. He would always say thank you, every single morning, like it was the first time. I remember how he'd look at me across the kitchen table, half smiling, half asleep. Those small moments, those gentle habits, they were everything to me. Our home wasn't big, but it was full. The smell of old wood, the sound of our ceiling fan that never stopped humming, the pictures on the wall, they were all part of our story. There was laughter, sometimes arguments, but always love to hold it together. Or so I thought. It started to change slowly. So slowly, I didn't notice at first. He began staying out later, saying he was tired from work. He stopped asking how my day was. The tea I made sat untouched sometimes. He'd smile less, speak less, and the distance between us started to stretch, quiet and invisible, like fog. I tried to fill that silence with kindness. I'd make his favorite dinner, leave small notes in his lunchbox. But every attempt felt like throwing words into a well and waiting for an echo that never came back. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd say, no, just tired. That's what people say when something is wrong, but they don't want to talk about it. There were nights I'd lie awake beside him, listening to his breathing. Once, I reached out to hold his hand, like I used to, but he shifted away. He didn't even notice. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to. I remember thinking, maybe love fades quietly, like sound after a song ends. But I didn't want to believe that. Not yet. Then came the day I got sick. It wasn't sudden. I'd been feeling tired for weeks, brushing it off as just work or stress. But one morning, I collapsed in the kitchen. The sound of the cup breaking on the floor was the last thing I heard before everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The lights were harsh, the air cold. There was a nurse adjusting something by my side. My head felt heavy, but I looked around for him, the one person I wanted to see. And there he was, sitting by the window, staring out. He looked worried, yes, but also distant. When our eyes met, he gave a weak smile, the kind people give when they don't know what else to do. I whispered, I'm okay. He nodded. They said you fainted. You need rest. His voice was flat, careful, like he was speaking to someone he didn't want to upset, but also didn't want to get too close to. Over the next few days, I stayed in the hospital. Tests, drips, the smell of antiseptic everywhere. I kept hoping he'd talk to me, really talk, but he was always quiet. He'd come and go. Some days he'd stay for an hour, some days only 10 minutes. I started to realize that he wasn't just tired. He was somewhere else, emotionally, maybe even physically. I didn't know where, or with whom, but I knew it wasn't with me anymore. One evening, I asked him to sit closer. I said softly, "Do you remember what you told me that morning in the kitchen? You said you'd always be here." He looked at me for a long moment, then looked away. "People change," he said quietly. That was all. 2 words that broke 17 years of shared mornings, laughter, and love. People change. I wanted to ask, when did you change? But I didn't. Because I could already see the answer in his eyes. After that, something inside me began to fall apart. Not in a loud, dramatic way. It was a quiet collapse, like watching sand slip through your fingers, knowing you can't catch it all before it's gone. He still came to visit for a while. But each time, he seemed more distracted. His phone would buzz, and he'd step out to answer. He'd come back saying it was work. I wanted to believe him. But one night, as I lay awake in that hospital bed, I realized I was waiting for someone who had already left me. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, he was gone. The nurses were kind. One of them, an older lady named Maria, would talk to me when I couldn't sleep. She'd say, "You know, sometimes people can't handle seeing the ones they love in pain. It makes them run." I nodded, but deep down, I knew it wasn't about pain. It was about choice. He chose to walk away, even while I was lying there, needing him most. I still remember the night he left. It was raining, not heavily, but enough to make everything outside blur behind the glass. I was half asleep when I heard him talking softly on the phone. He said, "I can't keep doing this." His voice cracked a little, but there was no anger. Just finality. I didn't move. I pretended to be asleep. He finished the call, gathered his things quietly, and kissed my forehead, like a goodbye he didn't want me to hear. Then he walked out. The door closed softly, and the sound echoed through the room longer than it should have. When I woke fully, the chair by the window was empty. His jacket was gone. His phone charger, too. I called his name softly, as if maybe he'd just stepped out to get coffee. But no one answered. That morning, the nurse came in and saw the empty chair. She gave me a look, one that was full of sympathy, but no surprise. She didn't ask questions. Neither did I. Because some goodbyes don't need words. I stayed in that hospital for another week. My body healed, but my heart didn't. Every day, I looked at the door, half expecting him to walk in and say it was all a mistake. That he just needed time, that he'd come back. But he didn't. On the last day, when they wheeled me out to the lobby, I saw other patients being met with smiles, flowers, and hugs. I had no one waiting for me. The nurse helped me call a cab. I sat by the window on the ride home, watching the rain streak down the glass. It looked like tears the sky forgot to hide. When I reached home, it didn't feel like home anymore. His shoes were gone from the doorway. The framed photo on the table, the one from our 10th anniversary, was face down. I stood there for a long time, in that quiet room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the hollow sound of my own breathing. That's when I understood what real loneliness felt like. It isn't being alone. It's realizing that the person you thought would stay forever has already decided to go. The first few mornings after he left felt unreal. I kept thinking he'd walk through the door again, carrying his work bag, pretending nothing happened. But every day that passed, the silence grew heavier. It's strange how quickly a house can change. Without him, it felt bigger somehow, like every room was echoing his absence. The bed felt colder. The kitchen seemed quieter. Even the clock sounded louder, as if it wanted me to remember every second he wasn't there. I told myself maybe he just needed space. Maybe he was struggling too, in his own way. So I waited. And waiting became my new routine. Every morning, I brewed tea for two, just out of habit. I'd pour his cup, set it on the table, and stare at it until it turned cold. Some days I'd whisper, "It's getting cold, you should drink it," as if he was still there. The human mind plays tricks when it's desperate for comfort. I knew he wasn't coming back, but pretending he might made the pain a little quieter. One afternoon, I gathered the courage to call him. The phone rang once. Twice. Then went to voicemail. His voice on the recording was cheerful, the same voice that once told me stories at night and promised forever. "Hey, it's me. Leave a message." I froze. I didn't know what to say. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked. "I just wanted to know if you're okay, if you're coming home." I ended the call and sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the line before it went dead. He didn't call back. That became a pattern. Every few days, I'd try again. Sometimes he'd pick up, just long enough to say, "I'm busy." Other times, there was nothing. Once, I asked, "Are you ever coming home?" He sighed and said, "Let's not do this now." His tone was sharp, not angry, but detached. Like he was speaking to someone he used to know. When the call ended, I stared at the phone in my hand, realizing I had become a stranger to the man I once shared a life with. A month passed. Then two. People started asking questions. Our neighbor, Mrs. Dean, saw me one morning and asked, "Where's your husband, dear? Haven't seen him lately." I smiled and said, "Work trip." The lie came easily. It hurt less than explaining the truth. But when I went back inside, I felt the weight of that lie pressing down on me. Because pretending everything was fine meant admitting, deep down, that it wasn't. Bills started piling up. He had always handled most of them, and now I had to figure it out myself. I found unopened envelopes with his name on them, letters from the bank, reminders, receipts. There were papers I didn't recognize, accounts I didn't know we had. That's when the unease turned into something heavier, suspicion. Was he hiding something from me before he left? One evening, I opened one of the envelopes. It was a hotel receipt, 2 nights, a place across town. My hands started shaking. The dates were from the week before my collapse. I told myself it must be for work. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't work. It wasn't business. It was something, someone else. I wish I could say I confronted him. That I demanded answers, that I shouted or cried. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at that small piece of paper, feeling like the ground beneath me had quietly disappeared. Love doesn't always end with screaming. Sometimes it ends with silence, a silence so deep, it swallows your breath. After that night, I stopped calling. If he wanted to reach out, he would. But he didn't. Weeks turned into months. I started noticing how people looked at me, with that mix of pity and curiosity. They knew. Or maybe they just guessed. I could almost hear their whispers when I passed by. She's all alone now. Poor woman. He left her. I learned to walk slower, to keep my head down, to smile at people who didn't deserve an explanation. Nights were the hardest. The quiet was unbearable. Sometimes I'd sit in the living room with the TV on, just for the noise. Other times I'd lie awake and listen, not for him, but for the memories that refused to leave. The sound of his laughter from another time. The echo of his footsteps in the hallway. The ghost of a voice saying, "I'll always be here." Then, one day, I ran into his sister at the market. We hadn't spoken in months. She looked uncomfortable, hesitant. After a moment, she said softly, "I thought you knew." "Knew what?" I asked. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "He's been seeing someone." For a while. There it was. The truth I already knew, finally spoken out loud. She reached for my hand. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you sooner." I smiled weakly. "It's okay. Thank you." I walked home slowly, carrying the groceries I didn't need. My hands trembled so much that one of the apples fell to the ground and rolled away. I didn't pick it up. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the space he used to sleep in. I whispered into the emptiness, "Why wasn't I enough?" No one answered. Maybe there was no answer. Days turned into a pattern again. I got up, made tea, cleaned the house, watched the light move across the walls. I tried to fill the silence with chores, but the quiet always found its way back in. I started visiting the park near our house, a small place with benches under tall trees. There, I would sit for hours, watching families walk by. Mothers holding their children's hands. Couples sharing small smiles. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were, or if they took their love for granted the way I once did. Sometimes I imagined he might show up there. Maybe he'd walk by, see me sitting alone, and stop. Maybe he'd sit beside me, not say anything, just sit. But that never happened. Instead, I learned to find a strange comfort in solitude. When you've been abandoned, loneliness becomes your shadow, constant, familiar, almost protective. I learned to talk to it. To say, "We'll be okay, just you and me." Months later, I saw him again, by accident. It was in a supermarket. I was buying tea leaves, the same kind he used to like. I turned the corner, and there he was, standing by the counter, holding a woman's hand. They were laughing. For a moment, time stopped. Everything went quiet. He saw me. Our eyes met. And for a second, I thought I saw guilt in his expression. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but the woman tugged his arm gently. He turned away. Just like that, 17 years of love, gone in a single heartbeat. I didn't cry there. I just walked out slowly, paid for my tea, and left. When I reached home, I placed the tea on the counter and sat on the floor. The tears came then, not loud, not violent. Just soft, steady. They say time heals. But I think time just teaches you how to hide the pain better. After that day, I stopped waiting for him to come back. But stopping the wait didn't mean forgetting. I still saw his shadow in the house, still heard his voice when I closed my eyes. Sometimes I'd wake up from dreams where he was still beside me, and for a second, I'd believe it. Then I'd open my eyes and remember the truth. He promised forever. But forever ended too soon. I didn't know it then, but the hardest part wasn't losing him. It was learning to live in the spaces he left behind. The spaces in conversation. In the quiet hours of the night. In the places where love used to live. That was the real loneliness, the kind that stays, even when you've stopped crying. The days began to blend together. One morning, I looked around the house and realized everything was exactly where he left it. His books on the shelf. His favorite mug on the counter. His old jacket hanging by the door. I thought about packing them away, but I couldn't. Touching them felt like reopening a wound I was barely surviving. So I left everything as it was, a museum of what used to be love. People asked if I hated him. I didn't. Hate would mean there was still something alive between us. What I felt was emptiness, quiet, colorless, endless. And somehow, that was worse. I don't know exactly when grief turned into routine. Maybe it was the day I stopped checking my phone. Maybe it was the morning I looked at his empty side of the bed and didn't cry. Pain, I've learned, doesn't vanish, it just changes its shape. At first, it was sharp. Now, it's dull, heavy, like a shadow that follows me quietly wherever I go. I started moving through the days like a ghost in my own home. I cooked less, spoke less, laughed almost never. Some mornings, I'd catch myself humming the tune of a song we used to love, and then stop mid-note when I remembered. I had become half of a story that was never finished. One Sunday, I decided to clean the house, properly, for the first time in months. The dust had gathered on every surface, like time had been waiting for me to notice it. I picked up the picture frame from our anniversary, the one that had fallen face down. It was a photo of us at the seaside, smiling, holding hands, waves behind us. He looked happy. I did too. I remember that day vividly. We had fought the night before, over something small, I don't even remember what. But that morning, he apologized. He held me close and said, "Let's not waste our days being angry." I believed him then. I really did. Now, looking at that picture, I wondered if he ever meant it. Or if he had already started leaving me, one small step at a time. As I wiped the glass of the frame, my hand trembled. A tear slipped onto the photo, right over his smile. It blurred a little, the ink, the edges, the memory itself. I whispered softly, "Where did you go?" The walls didn't answer, but I could almost hear the echo of my own voice coming back. Nowhere you can reach. The house smelled like old books and rain that day. I sat by the window, watching drops race down the glass, and realized how long it had been since I'd felt the world outside. Everything had been about him, his absence, his silence, his betrayal. But what about me? Who was I without him? That question hurt more than any goodbye. That evening, I took a walk. It was a small decision, but it felt like a rebellion against the grief that had caged me for months. The sky was turning pink. Children were laughing somewhere nearby. I hadn't noticed how beautiful ordinary life could sound when you stopped hiding from it. At the park, I sat on my usual bench, the same one where I used to wait, imagining he might find me there. Only this time, I wasn't waiting for him. I was just sitting. A quiet peace settled over me, the kind that comes after too much pain. I wasn't healed. I wasn't strong. But I was still here. The next few weeks passed in small fragments of change. I started cooking again, simple meals for myself. I called old friends. Some didn't pick up. Some did. It was awkward at first, but comforting, too. One evening, my friend Clara came by. She looked around the house, noticed the untouched furniture, the dust, the silence. She said softly, "You've been living like he's coming back." I didn't answer. She reached for my hand and added, "You deserve more than waiting." Her words lingered long after she left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, turning off lights one by one. When I reached the living room, I stopped in front of the door where his jacket still hung. It smelled faintly of him, that mix of cologne and wind and memories. I took it down slowly. And for the first time, I folded it, placed it in a box, and closed the lid. It felt like closing a chapter, one I wasn't ready to end, but needed to. The next morning, I woke early and opened all the windows. The air that rushed in felt fresh, almost cleansing. I brewed just 1 cup of tea, for myself. It tasted different. Maybe because it was finally mine. I wish I could say that was the day I stopped hurting. But healing isn't a straight line. It's a circle. You keep walking around the same pain until one day, it doesn't cut as deep. Some nights, I still reached out to the other side of the bed, half expecting warmth. Some mornings, I still thought I heard his voice. But those moments faded quicker now. Then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there he was. He looked older, thinner, tired. For a second, I couldn't breathe. He said, "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting him in. My hands were cold. My heart was loud. He looked around the house, at the familiar walls, the furniture, the empty space that used to be his life. Everything was the same, but different. He sat down quietly. I didn't offer tea. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I'm sorry." Just that. 2 words that used to mean everything, and now, nothing at all. I wanted to scream, to ask why, to make him feel the pain I'd carried. But all I said was, "Why now?" He looked down. Because I thought I was happier. I wasn't. I waited for more, an explanation, a reason, something to hold on to. But that was it. He said he'd made mistakes. He said the woman he'd left with had moved on too. He said he thought about me every day. I listened in silence. Not because I forgave him, but because I was too tired to hate. He asked if we could start over. I almost laughed. Start over. After all the nights I cried alone. After the hospital, the silence, the emptiness. I shook my head slowly. "You left when I needed you most," I said softly. "And I can't forget that." He nodded. Maybe he knew I was right. Before he left, he looked at me one last time and whispered, "You'll always be the one I loved most." I didn't answer. Because love isn't something you claim after you've broken it. He walked out again, but this time, I didn't wait for him to come back. That night, I sat in the same chair by the window. The same spot where I once watched him leave the hospital. But now, it felt different. The silence wasn't as heavy. The loneliness wasn't as cruel. Because I finally understood, the pain wasn't proof that I'd been abandoned. It was proof that I had loved deeply, honestly, and completely. And there's no shame in that. Days turned into weeks again, but this time I was moving forward. I started painting. Small things, flowers, skies, faces without names. It felt strange at first, to create something just for me. But each color I brushed onto the canvas felt like a heartbeat coming back to life. One evening, as the sun set, I stood on the balcony watching the sky fade from orange to blue. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop fighting what's already gone. I still think of him sometimes. Not with anger. Not even with longing. Just with quiet acceptance. He was part of my story. But he's not the whole story anymore. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting the pain, but learning to live gently beside it. It's strange how silence changes over time. In the beginning, it was heavy, unbearable even. It filled every corner of my home, pressing down on me until I could hardly breathe. But now it feels different. Lighter somehow. Like the quiet has stopped shouting and learned to sit beside me, quietly, patiently. Maybe that's what healing sounds like, not the absence of pain, but learning how to live with its echo. After he left the second time, I thought the sadness would swallow me whole again. But it didn't. This time, the grief was softer. It didn't crash over me like a wave, it flowed gently, like rain that knows where to fall. I wasn't the same woman I had been before. I was quieter, older in spirit, but somehow more aware of myself than ever. I started writing again, just small notes at first. Little thoughts, memories, questions I'd never had the courage to ask aloud. I wrote them all in a small blue notebook. Sometimes it was about him. Sometimes it was about me. Sometimes it was just about the world, how it kept moving, even when I couldn't. One page simply said, "I'm still here." And for a long time, that was enough. Every week, I visited the park. I'd sit under the same old oak tree, the one that had become my quiet companion. Children would run past me, laughter filling the air. It used to make me ache inside, seeing what I'd lost, or maybe never had. But one day, a little girl stopped in front of me. She handed me a small yellow flower and said, "This one's for you." Her mother smiled from a few steps away, embarrassed. But I smiled back and said, "Thank you, sweetheart." The flower was small, fragile, imperfect, but it was real. And for some reason, that tiny gesture broke something open inside me. I realized I'd spent so much time mourning what was gone, I'd forgotten how to notice what was still here. I began talking to people again, slowly, cautiously. The woman who sold bread at the corner shop, the man who walked his dog past my gate every evening. Small words, small connections. They didn't fill the emptiness, but they softened its edges. It reminded me that life doesn't end just because love does. One afternoon, I decided to visit my sister, someone I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. When I called her, she paused before saying, "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me again." I laughed softly. I wasn't sure either. When I arrived, she hugged me tighter than she ever had before. We sat for hours, talking about everything and nothing, childhood, memories, family recipes, old regrets. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You've always been the strong one. Even when you didn't know it." I didn't feel strong. But hearing it from her made me realize, maybe strength isn't about holding everything together. Maybe it's about standing up again, even when there's nothing left to hold. Seasons changed. The trees outside my window turned golden, then bare, then green again. With each season, I found a little more of myself. Not the woman I used to be, but the woman I was learning to become. I planted flowers in the garden, lilies, because they reminded me of peace. The first time they bloomed, I sat beside them for hours, watching the petals open under the morning sun. I thought about how something could die in winter and still find a way to live again when spring comes. Maybe people are the same. Sometimes I still think of him. I don't try to stop it anymore. The memories come quietly, the laughter, the shared dinners, the sound of his voice reading the newspaper in the mornings. They used to hurt like broken glass. Now they just ache. There's a difference. Pain is sharp, ache is soft. Ache is what's left when you've made peace with the fact that some wounds never really close. One evening, as I was locking up the house, I found his old watch in a drawer. It had stopped working years ago, but I'd never thrown it away. I held it in my hand for a while, tracing the scratches on its surface. Every mark had a story. Every story had a place in my heart. I didn't cry. Instead, I placed it gently in a small wooden box, the same one that held his jacket, his letters, our photographs. Then I whispered, "Thank you for the time we had." It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. But it was close enough. I've realized forgiveness isn't something you give for their sake. It's something you give yourself, so you can breathe again. He'll never know the nights I stayed awake wondering why. He'll never know how many times I reached for the phone and stopped myself. But that's okay. Because I've learned that not every story needs an ending. Some just need to be released. One morning, I woke up before sunrise. The sky was still dark, with just a hint of light on the horizon. I stood by the window and watched the world waking up. The air felt cool and quiet, like a promise. And for the first time in a long while, I whispered to myself, "It's okay to let go." I didn't say it to forget him. I said it to remember myself. I started taking longer walks. I noticed the way the air smelled after rain, the way people smiled at strangers, the way the world kept spinning without waiting for anyone. There was something comforting in that, the reminder that life doesn't stop for heartbreak. It keeps moving, quietly, patiently, waiting for us to catch up. Every so often, I'd sit at the park bench again, watching the world go by. Sometimes I'd see couples holding hands, and a small part of me would still ache. But it no longer felt like envy. It felt like gratitude that I had once known love deeply enough to miss it. Not everyone gets that. One day, an older man sat beside me on the bench. We didn't speak for a while, just watched the sky. Then he said softly, "You look like someone who's loved deeply." I smiled faintly. Maybe too deeply. He nodded. "There's no such thing." When he stood to leave, he said, "The ones who love deeply are the ones who survive the storms." I never saw him again, but his words stayed with me. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. Maybe the ones who break are also the ones who understand love best. I closed the book and smiled, a small, real smile. It didn't erase the sadness, but it made space for peace beside it. And that, I think, is what living really means. I still sleep alone. I still keep one side of the bed untouched, not because I expect him back, but because I've grown used to the space. It reminds me that I made it through. And maybe one day, someone will fill that space, or maybe not. Either way, I'll be okay. Because now I know I am enough. Sometimes, when I think of him, I still whisper a quiet prayer, not for him to return, but for him to find peace too. Because once, he was my world. And no matter how much it hurt, that love was real. And real love, even when it breaks, leaves something beautiful behind. It's been years now. I sometimes lose count of how many seasons have passed since that night, the night I waited in the hospital bed, holding on to hope that never came. Time has a way of blurring things. Faces, dates, even pain. But there are moments that never fade. They stay, not to haunt you, but to remind you that you've lived. And I have lived. In my own quiet, imperfect way. Every morning, I wake up before the sun. The first thing I do is open the curtains and let the light in. It's a habit I started after he left, maybe to prove to myself that I could still welcome new beginnings, even if they hurt a little. Sometimes, the light feels too bright. Sometimes, I close my eyes and whisper, "Not today." But most days, I stand there for a moment and just breathe. The world feels softer now. Or maybe I've just learned to stop fighting it. There's a photo of us on the shelf near the kitchen. He's smiling in it, really smiling, the way he used to before life got so heavy between us. For a long time, I couldn't look at it without crying. Now, I dust it every week, and I say, "Hello again." That's all. It's not forgiveness. It's not bitterness either. It's just acknowledgement. A quiet understanding that what we had was real, even if it didn't last. I think about the woman I was before all this. The one who believed love could fix everything, who waited by doors, who stayed up at night counting all the ways things might get better. She was kind. She was hopeful. She didn't know yet that love sometimes leaves without warning. I miss her. But I've grown to love the woman who came after her. The one who survived, even when she didn't want to. I still go to the park sometimes. The same bench, the same oak tree. There's something comforting about returning to a place that has seen your worst days. It's like the earth remembers, but doesn't judge. One morning, I saw an elderly couple sitting nearby. The man was feeding crumbs to the pigeons, and the woman kept reminding him not to give them too much. They laughed together, the kind of laughter that comes from decades of shared memories. For a moment, I felt that old ache again, the one that whispers, "That could have been you." But then another thought came quietly, like a breeze. It wasn't. But that's okay. Not every love story is meant to last a lifetime. Some are meant to teach you how to love at all. I still wear the ring sometimes. Not because I'm waiting. Not because I can't let go. But because it's a part of my story. It reminds me that I once believed in something beautiful, and that belief shaped who I am. When people see it, they probably assume I'm still married. I don't correct them. There's no need to explain everything. Some things live better in silence. In the evenings, when the world gets quiet, I sometimes talk to him, not out loud, just in my heart. I tell him about my days. How the garden is growing. How the weather's been kind. I tell him I hope he's well, wherever he is. And though I'll never know what became of him, I like to believe he found a bit of peace too. Maybe that's what I needed all along, to know that even apart, we both kept going. There's something I've come to realize about heartbreak: it doesn't end. It changes shape. At first, it's sharp. It cuts through every breath. Then, with time, it dulls. It settles quietly in the corners of your heart. And one day, you realize it's not pain anymore. It's memory. It's the proof that you loved, that you risked, that you were human enough to care deeply. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. I write a lot these days. Not stories, not really. Just pieces of thoughts, scattered like breadcrumbs. One of the pages says, "Maybe love is not about staying. Maybe it's about showing up, even for a little while, and leaving a mark that never fades." I think that's true. Because even though he left, his presence shaped everything I became after. The pain, the waiting, the loneliness, all of it carved something deeper in me. Something more real. Sometimes, on rainy nights, I imagine what it would be like if he came back, just once, to explain, to say sorry, to sit with me for a cup of tea like before. But then I think, maybe that would ruin what little peace I've found. Maybe some goodbyes are meant to remain unfinished. Because closure isn't always about answers. Sometimes, it's about accepting that you'll never get them. The hospital. It's funny how that place still lingers in my mind. The beeping machines. The smell of antiseptic. The slow shuffle of nurses' shoes down the hall. That was the night everything changed. And sometimes, when I pass by a hospital on the bus, I still feel a tightness in my chest. A reminder that love once stood at the edge of my life and chose to walk away. But I no longer hate that memory. I just carry it, quietly, respectfully. Because that night was not only the night he left. It was also the night I learned I could stand on my own. People often say time heals all wounds. But I don't think that's true. Time doesn't heal. It teaches. It teaches you how to live around the pain. How to smile even when the ache is still there. How to find beauty in the small, ordinary things: a warm cup of tea, a friendly nod, a ray of light across the floor. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without breaking. And I think that's what I've finally learned to do. The lilies are blooming again. Their white petals open gently in the morning air, untouched, unbothered, alive. Every year, they remind me that life comes back, no matter how long the winter lasts. I sit beside them sometimes, close my eyes, and listen. The world feels soft then. Almost kind. And I think to myself, maybe this is what peace feels like: not happiness, not joy, but quiet understanding. I don't know where he is now. I don't know if he ever thinks of me. And maybe it doesn't matter anymore. Because I think of him less and less. And when I do, it doesn't hurt the same. It feels more like remembering an old dream, one that was beautiful while it lasted, but wasn't meant to stay. I sometimes wonder if he ever regrets it, walking away when I needed him most. But even if he does, it won't change anything. Because I learned that love isn't just about who stays. It's about who you become after they leave. And I became someone who can still see beauty, still offer kindness, still believe in love, even if it broke me once. I guess that's my story. Not a grand one. Not one with a happy ending. But it's mine. And maybe that's enough. If you asked me now whether I'd go through it all again, I think I'd say yes. Because even with all the pain, all the waiting, all the tears, I still got to feel something real. I still got to love deeply. And that, I believe, is what life is all about. When I sit by the window at night, I sometimes whisper his name. Not because I want him back, but because I want to remember who I was when I loved him. There's sadness in that memory, yes. But there's also light. Because even though he promised forever and left me in the hospital alone, I survived. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of it all.